Thanks for joining us today, good girls, for just a quickie before Kay and I head out for spring break. And before you call it a break, we are traveling with our kids, so uh,
It'll be an adrenaline-filled adventure.
yeah, send thoughts and prayers because you will be getting this, and we will probably still be traveling with our children, so we will need all of your thoughts and prayers. Okay, today's episode is about the book Vagina Obscura by Rachel E. Gross. And I love this book so much that I feel like we need to do multiple episodes about it. The New York Times called it required reading for all lawmakers. And I am not a lawmaker and don't really know any lawmakers that
Well,
well.
if it makes you feel better, no male lawmaker is going to read the book regardless, besides maybe, like
You know what? Male lawmakers, if you have read this book, DM me because you automatically have my vote. Just tell me that you read Vagina Obscura or any book about vaginas, and you're willing to tell me that, then I will vote for you. So, in lieu of sharing it with my elected representatives, other than my frequent calls about my many lists of grievances, I am going to share this book with our fan base, with all the good girls.
Woohoo.
So, jumping right in, Rachel Gross starts out the introduction by sharing this story about how, for so many women, we know so little about our bodies. As the book goes on, we will discover that science and humanity as a whole really doesn't know anything about women's bodies, so we should not be embarrassed, ladies. But she shares this kind of, at the time, she felt embarrassing story about a case of what turned out to be bacterial vaginosis. And it got so bad, none of the other treatments work. So she's finally prescribed boric acid, which is basically rat poison. And that is still like kind of our last ditch effort.
Oh
If
my gosh,
nothing else
do
clears
not
up
rat
BV.
poison up your pussy.
Apparently, it is still prescribed because we still have
Okay.
not figured out how to do things. Although there is a later chapter where
I'm a
they
survivor of bacterial vaginosis, and I do not remember being
It's like if no other
yeah.
treatments work, this is the absolute nuclear option, and it is basically like putting nuclear waste into your vagina, but it will kill the bad bacteria along with all the other things in your biome. There's a whole interesting chapter in the book about the vaginal biome, which we could discuss on a future episode, but there
So
is
you
promising
know.
research about, how they do fecal bacteria transfers to fix people's gut biome when they
You
have
transfer
recurring issues?
vaginal wall biomes?
Yeah, there's like a whole emerging science, but part of the thing that's slowing it down is that people are grossed out by that. But somehow we're okay with being transplanted with other people's poop samples to fix our gut issues, but we are not okay with some people are squeamish about the idea of rubbing some of your vagina on somebody else's vagina, even though that's a very popular recreational thing to do. So I think that we should get over it.
A telltale sign symptom of bacterial vaginosis is a fishy
Smell,
smell.
yeah.
Yeah, and I just love that because, like, who determined that? Like, how many vaginas did you smell that you have determined how the average vagina smells and what smells distinctly fishy, and were enough vaginas smelled? I don't know.
This actually reminds me of a embarrassing sidebar from today. I was on one of those t-shirt websites where you can pick a t-shirt design and then apply it to any t-shirt that you want. And I was getting my son a new shirt and he is obsessed with sushi. So I searched sushi and of course there were a bunch of cute little cartoon sushi t-shirts, of which I did purchase one. But I also learned that apparently there were like these ones where it says sushi lover and then it's a little diagram of a guy going down on a girl and then it says sushi lover underneath. And I was like, the woman that you're going down on might have bacterial vaginosis if you are likening it to sushi.
Who is buying that? Like, who is buying the shirt that says sushi lover?
I don't know. The same guys that are buying the like must be this tall to ride shirts and the various other ones with little like sexual euphemisms. And sometimes these men have like daughters too, because there was a whole thing on social media with teenagers like posting their dad's embarrassing shirt or like wearing their dad's embarrassing shirt to turn the joke around on him. So yeah, anyway, she talks about this case of she's prescribed boric acid for her BV and one night she's so tired that instead of inserting the pill vaginally, she takes it orally and immediately is like, oh, fuck. And goes to the emergency room. Luckily, doesn't have to have her stomach pumped, but
We
she's
are a
just
lot bigger than rats. Like, rats are scarily big, but,
good point.
yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like those studies with pregnant women and caffeine. And then they're like, oh, don't have caffeine when you're pregnant. And then it turns out that the study was on mice, giving them so much caffeine that it would be the equivalent of having like 24 cups of coffee. And they're like, oh, the mice had spontaneous, like,
Yeah, it's like, don't
fetal
give, like,
death, abortion, when they had the equivalent of 25 cups of coffee. And I'm
get,
like,
like, a
oh,
grande from Starbucks.
yeah, let me,
Like,
can I just know if I could have 1 cup of coffee, please? That's what I'm interested in. Anyway, so Rachel Gross talks about the whole experience of having BV, of, yeah, essentially getting prescribed rat poison as like, really, this is the only thing that we have? And then just kind of like the whole embarrassing, she's like, I'm the child of a scientist. I feel like I should have known this better. I should have understood the condition. And I'm like, I feel like every woman has a story of something where you're like, oh, I didn't really know that about my body.
yes, listeners who were there on the early days of sex education will know that when I first started getting my period, I was so confused about why the tampon just wasn't working out for me. It really hurt to insert. It would come out whenever I peed. It would always be yellow. And finally, I brought this up to my mom, and she looked at me and she's like, there are 3 holes. You are inserting the tampon up your pee hole, and there is another hole. And
There
so
is
my
another hole.
my poor urethra was like, "Get that, like, big piece of cotton out of me." Yeah.
All right, so let's jump in then, Kay, and explore the mysteries of the third hole. So she basically frames this book on the fact vagina obscura is like comes from the term camera obscura of we have these unknown depths of what is happening with the female anatomy, and there is so little known about it, and even the parts that we do, sometimes the research has been incorrect. It's been very much based on the male body as a default and the women's body as being some lesser deviation of the male anatomy that pretty much doesn't matter unless you are making babies with it. And that is clear in the fact that it is 2014 when we first have a branch of the NIH that is actually exists to talk about women's, we won't call it, she doesn't call it reproductive systems ever, because she points out that like clitoris, for example, has absolutely no reproductive purpose. And so really just like that whole downstairs region, the NIH does
Why
not start.
wasn't the clitoris put on the inside of the vagina?
So I actually, a lot of queer scientists have pointed that out, that evolutionarily that makes more sense that it exists entirely for pleasure, because it does not require having something inserted inside your vagina for it to have contact with it. And it actually is evidence for same-sex relationships in nature that you see in other species, that there are a lot of ways to enjoy your clitoris without having a penis inserted. And as we've discussed on previous episodes, in fact, most women don't get a climax from just,
Well,
traditional P&V.
yes, I also wonder if it's a way to make sure that women are careful with who they choose as their, like, baby-making partner, because you
Mm,
don't necessarily need them for your sexual pleasure. Or, like, you don't need to make a baby to have sexual pleasure with,
exactly.
yeah, whether it's
Yeah.
man or woman or
Yeah. I
yourself.
like that from an evolutionary perspective as well, that, yeah, then the two can be kind of separated, although we haven't really thought about that very much historically. And indeed, the clitoris has just gotten kind of lumped in with what we call the reproductive system.
When you
But
first find a man who understands the clitoris, you're like, "You are a great, wonderful man. I will now allow you entrance."
maybe he is a researcher from the NIH branch that was started in 2014 for gynecological studies that are unrelated to the study of women's, we'll call it genitalia, in their own right, and
Oh,
not.
I don't know if I like that, but
Okay,
I'll
well,
I'll
we're gonna
I'll
get into nomenclature. We're gonna get into nomenclature.
accept it.
Um, I will say first, before we get into the contents of the book, so I started with it on the audiobook narration because I do find it very hard to get all the way through a book if I'm reading it, at least in the case of nonfiction. So I listened to the audio narration, which is by Siho Elsmore. She is quite prolific, so it's not some random person. Um, I cannot decide if she is trying to be whimsical or if she is serious about this. We've discussed that we can be put off in audiobooks sometimes in the fiction because they'll do like voices and it's a woman reading the book and then it's like the male lines and he's like, "Hey baby,
Yeah,
why don't you
it's
touch
like,
my penis?"
don't ruin that male
Don't do voices.
character for me,
Okay.
please.
So she does voices throughout the book. And I hated it at first. After a while, I was like, I don't know. Maybe this is so unhinged that it's actually keeping me hooked to the book to just hear what she's going to do next. She'll read something from Sigmund Freud. So she'll like do an Austrian German accent kind of thing.
Oh.
Which, like, in the beginning, she's talking about history, so there are all these, like, European men, so she's like, "The reason for the woman's vagina is the following," and she does these voices, and it's very unhinged. But then she gets to more modern things, so then there are women from Africa that they interview and stuff, and I think then at that point she realizes that you can't do accents that are like, then it just comes across as degrading, so then she kinda stops doing accents at some point, and also she just, like, weirdly pronounces a lot of words. I looked her up. She's an Australian who lives in New York, so I think it makes a lot more sense that when she reads the lines of people with Australian who are Australian, that I'm like, "Oh, her Australian accent is so good," because she's Australian. So I'm like, "Why don't you just do the book in an Australian
Oh my
accent?"
gosh,
She's,
we
like,
would
trying to
all
fake.
rather listen to that.
Right? First of all, I love an Australian accent. Second of all, she's trying to fake an American accent, and she doesn't do it that well, so then her pronunciation is just, like, really confusing, and my ADD
Americans
brain was
love
so
Australian
distracted.
accents.
Well, she, like, didn't know how to pronounce. I mean, I noticed, like, French words she didn't always pronounce correctly, which, like,
That's
whatever.
all
It's a
of
book in
us.
English. Yeah, that's all of us. But then, like, she didn't pronounce Notre Dame, the university, correctly. She called it, like, Notre Dame or something, a
Oh,
combination of the
it is a
cathedral and things.
predominantly, Irish university.
Right.
They definitely say Notre
We
Dame.
definitely say Notre Dame, and just things like that where I'm like, "These are just, like, weird choices." Anyway, so I was very distracted through the book, so at some point, I was also enjoying it so much that I did switch to buying a hard copy, but if you just wanna hear some weird accents being imitated, it will, keep you engaged in a certain way. So anyway, jumping into the book, we start with Hippocrates, who is the daddy of medicine going back to the ancient Greeks, and so he's kind of a big deal, but did you know, Kay, that he never actually studied a human woman? So he, like, was doing dissections and stuff, but some combination of cultural taboos and the fact that he just couldn't really get access to female corpses, he's just, like, getting his data by asking around to women he knows, which is not even clear how many gal pals he has.
And what the perspective of his gal pals are.
Yeah, exactly, like, and how much do they know? Because he can't dissect them, so he's just getting some secondhand information about female anatomy. So despite that,
And
all
what they're willing to share with him. I have so many questions
I
about
have so many
this.
ancient Greek questions, but leave it to a man to never let something like total lack of knowledge on a subject to hold him back. He decides to name the lady parts anyway, and his word for it in Greek translates to the shame parts. Um,
Boo!
Right? And so this goes forward into so many things like the first French anatomist to dissect a clitoris calls it the shameful member in French. And then the Latin word for vulva, pudendum, is also translated as the part for which you should be ashamed. My favorite is the German word for labia, which is Schamlippen or shame lips. Leave it to the Germans. So
Oh my gosh, can I only call them my shame lips from now on?
I really hope so. Kind of like in the way that we've reappropriated like slut with slut walks or like
Yeah.
cunt by just calling
Oh
everything
my
like a
gosh, my
cunty
partner
little
would be
bob.
so freaked out.
I know. I think, okay, that our new goal is to,
Open those shame lips.
yeah. Or just like in books, you know how they have sometimes like really weird euphemisms in books where they're like, oh, his sword plunged into her sheath. It would be like his member plunged between her shame lips
Oh
with a
my gosh.
quiver.
It should totally be used in German. Oh my gosh.
I do feel like we, in addition to reclaiming the shame lips, we should brainstorm some other new words for our shame parts on behalf of women everywhere. So I started with Reddit. My favorite one that I just came across randomly one time on Reddit, and I wrote it down in my good girl's phone note, is marital vegetables. which is just a general term for people's genitalia is their marital vegetables,
Well,
per
that's
se.
awful.
It's really awful. So I do like that it's non-gender specific, but I do think that it loses some points for slut shaming
Linking
and
it to marriage, yeah.
judging us for using our vegetables before marriage and spoiling them.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Similarly, in my Reddit deep dive, I got a slight snicker from penis flytrap. So I feel like that got 1 point for a funny pun, but then negative 100 points for defining women's genitalia in relationship to how they receive the male organs and also for being heteronormative.
I'll probably use it in bed, though. Come on into my penis
I mean, if
bed.
you're already in a hetero relationship and there is a penis going into the flytrap, then you should absolutely use it. I enjoyed Amuse Bouche, South Pole. Um,
Hmm,
there's like a complete list in the Vagina Monologues. Have you ever heard the Vagina Monologues done before?
I should. We should go see a
We
performance
should go
one day.
together. Yours truly has done the Vagina Monologues
This is the
before.
least surprising news ever.
No, the thing that's surprising about it is that it was put on in seminary, and so it was like me and all the other
It was a very
gal
liberal
pastors.
seminary.
It was a very liberal seminary for sure. Um, and that's kind of like one of the points in the Vagina Monologues. This is like one of the lines from the start of it where it says, "Let's just start with the word vagina. It sounds like an infection at best, maybe a medical instrument. Hurry, nurse, bring me the vagina. Vagina, vagina. Doesn't matter how many times you say it, it never sounds like a word you want to say. It's totally ridiculous, a completely unsexy word. If you use it during sex, trying to be politically correct, darling, could you stroke my vagina? You kill the act right there."
That's my, husband calls my daughter's one when he's taking care of her vagina. I think it's like a
Explain.
male way to make it comfortable. He's like, "Okay, like, now you need to wipe your vagina."
Is that like a combination between the thing that we have all been taught as millennial parents to refer to our children's private parts by their correct names so the kids learn them, but at the same time being uncomfortable actually saying vagina, so it's like a crossover?
I think that he feels fine saying penis, obviously, to our son. I think that something about the word vagina and saying it directly to his daughter, he needed some little
Just some little way to make it a little bit
yeah, I
of a
guess I don't know what I think I call it the VV, but that's again not I just don't I try not to say the word vagina because it's an ugly word.
Yeah, that was a lot of people. I was just flipping through some comments on Reddit because that's where I always get the opinions of the masses on the internet. And there were a lot of people who were saying things when I was looking at people's euphemisms for vagina that they were basically like, I'm not somebody who's really hung up on using the correct words for things, but I feel like it's a lot easier to say penis than vagina. And that idea that vagina is just like oh, it's not a great word. It doesn't sound nice, like the Vagina Monologues point out. And like Rachel Gross points out, there's also not a good word for the whole complete set. Like a lot of times when our daughters are taking baths, it's actually like your vulva that you're cleaning and not your vagina. And I do have a friend that's just very specific because she's like doing everything by the
Wash your
book.
vulva.
Yeah, she does say that to her daughter, that she'll be like, don't forget to wash your vulva. And I'm like, that is very correct. And we should if we're supposed to be teaching them the right words, like that is your vulva and not your vagina. But at the same time, I find that even more awkward to use. And I'm not somebody who's
It
squeamish
feels
about.
so organish.
Yeah, it is.
Hmm.
Shaman Lippin. No, I
I
guess.
call mine a petite V. Get all in my petite V. I've been calling it that for like a
My
decade.
vagine. There was an example in the book of one of her friends who she's 55. Like, she is, we'll talk about anything, but she still says to the author that she can't say vagina and she still says front butt, which is what her parents taught her when she was a kid.
Okay, well, front butt is the worst of all the options. That's for sure. I think I would rather say vagina or shame lips than
I
front butt.
do feel like my kid came up with front butt on their own and that was when I realized I did need to
But
start
they're a
using
clever
specific
genius.
terminology. I mean, I guess it just kind of makes sense in the fact that there's like a crack down there and it extends to your front, so it's kind of your front butt. But that was my dawning of realization that I needed to start using specific terminology with my kid, or they were going to be a
Front
55-year-old
butt.
that was saying front butt.
Mm.
So anyway, Rachel Gross's point about talking about this and that we don't have a word for that complete system, like an all-encompassing kind of word, unless we do just want to use a fun term like lady bits downstairs, something like that, to be sort of an not just a cutesy nickname because we're ashamed, but also because we don't have a good term for the complete set. But talk about vaginas, and a lot of that is also that we've just completely overlooked women in so much critical data. And reading this part, it really made me think of the book Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. I don't know, have I mentioned that book to you before, Kay? That's another one that I just feel is great, especially since you are a researcher. It's just so fascinating the amount of research that you hear cited all the time that when you dig into it is like so biased towards like whatever the male experience is. And she comes up with a lot of examples in that book of how that is harmful to everyone when you don't disaggregate data and when you do just like focus on the norm of being like a white hetero man.
This resonates.
Yes, I can imagine, especially in the medical world. But basically, time and time again, she's asking all these questions to researchers like, how does the menstrual cycle actually work? What is the G spot? Which she does get into. And I want to have a whole separate thing because I feel like, as I've said, most of my knowledge growing up came from Cosmo. I was a Cosmo girly. And there was a lot of talk about the G spot. And I never really like got clear there's just, like, so much, like, mystery surrounding as, like, is the G spot real? Like
There's still, like, some books I read by trusted authors where they say things like, "He really was hitting my G spot there." And I'm like, "I don't know, like, I'm a mid-30s woman who's had an active sexual life for a while, and I have never felt a G spot there." And so now I'm like, "Yeah, is it
okay, so
my body?
now
Is there something wrong with that?" Like, in that particular area that they're referencing.
well, we do have to do a whole episode about the G spot then because that was
I want the
just
scientific research on the G spots.
there is now scientific research about the G spot, so I'm so excited to share it with you all in a future episode, good girls. But to keep this as a quickie, I'm
Thank
going to
you.
save the spoilers. And anyway, so she's asking all these questions, and basically the answer that she gets time and time again is you can't see what you aren't looking for. And basically that like science hasn't been asking these questions. And a lot of it is just because of how women have been considered in research since like as long as we've had a concept of science and doing research. And women are basically seen as like passive recipients in when it does come to the reproductive side of things or just sex in general, that women are just sort of like passive vessels. For example, did you know it is like a lot more recent than you think that scientists understood that women were like 50-50 participants in the process of creating a child. And there's like the egg and the sperm, and that's like each 50%. And up until like more recently than you would think, they thought that the woman was just like this fertile field that is waiting to have the man's seeds sown in it.
Oh my.
Yeah. So, then I
That
guess if that's
doesn't
kind of your
even
point of
yeah.
view, then, like, you're not too interested in the, like, female anatomy because they're like it's just, like, whatever shape you need to, like, have to have your, stuff put in it. Um, there was a whole fascinating chapter on, on research on, like, animal vaginas, especially around birds, and the fact that they had, like, all these ornithologists who had been studying duck penises for a long
They're
time.
like corkscrews.
Yes,
Yes.
the ducks have corkscrew
Yeah, we
penises.
have talked about the duck penis before.
Yes, please reference our inanimate object, romance if you want to get into
The duck anatomy.
the duck anatomy and just the smutty side of duck penises in
Yeah,
rubber
do
duck
not
human
fuck a duck,
relationships.
but do learn about how ducks fuck.
So there was just like all these assumptions for a really long time that they didn't need to study the female bird anatomy because it would just be like whatever shape would fit that size penis, and that the vagina had evolved to fit whatever the male penis is. So there's this female ornithologist, woman ugh. So there's this woman ornithologist who finally is like, let's dissect some duck vaginas and finds so much interesting information, and basically we learn and conclude that the vagina has existed for longer than the penis, so it's actually the penises that are evolving to get into the vagina, and the vaginas in sometimes, like, evolve to be, contrary to whatever the male penis shape is, so that gives the females more reproductive selection and control over, like, who her baby daddy is going to be. So anyway, so fascinating around that, but like that even in evolution, women are not just like passively sort of like keeping up and responding to whatever the male anatomy is. We also run into a lot of issues with the Freudian famous idea of women being these unstable, men light kind of creatures, and Freud calls them a little creature without a penis.
Oh,
So
that's so sweet. I
I
would love to
know.
see myself as a little creature.
I'm gonna get a t-shirt that I'm gonna start wearing that says "a little creature without a penis." So basically that women are not worth studying, because they are just like a shitty version of men. And then finally, as we mentioned before, that there's this primary focus on our role as baby makers. So if it's not related directly to your ability to just punch out a bunch of babies, then it's probably not a problem. And on that track, of course, that there is a total de emphasis on female pleasure and really not a lot of interest in understanding it. Or even like you were questioning about the clitoris, that it's so like obviously there just for the sole purpose of pleasure. And yet we have just been like totally uninterested in that point. And everything related to it for like the whole history of, studying people's
Viva taking it
downstairs
off.
areas.
Yeah. Ugh,
Yes. Yes.
disturbing.
There is a whole chapter on female genital mutilation. Totally recommend reading it if you are interested in that topic because I found it to be a very good review of that subject.
Well, I learned a lot today.
Yes,
Thank you,
exactly.
Astra.
Now you don't have to listen to the news because you already learned at least one new thing today.
Woohoo. To close it up, to talk about something real fast that's been in the news at least this particular week, which is the Chappell Roan and
Chappell
famous
Roan. It's not Dave Chappelle.
Chapel. Well, I've always been saying it Chappelle's. No, I just know that my entire life. But Chappell Roan,
She could be on Chappelle's show.
she had this whole thing with Jude Law's daughter, but
Yes.
Georgino's stepdaughter, where it was accused it was her security who was extremely aggressive to the girl who's 11 years old, just passing by the table in a kind of like, ooh, it's a famous person. I'm just confirming that it is a famous person who I'm seeing in concert tonight. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, the security guard came out that it was just a random security guard who was for somebody else, not Chappell Roan, and that
Oh.
they really did just see it happen and decide to go and address the situation. And like, who's surprised that it was just a man who was a little bit more aggressive than they
Who's like,
needed
I'm
to
gonna
on behalf
protect
of no
women.
one. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go do this. I have the authority and the power to go do this. It's just like what a blown up, like way, way out of proportion situation across the board. And then for it all just to be a security guard for a different artist, it sounds like, who decided to go out of their way to approach an 11-year-old. It's like, okay, yeah, this all aligns with the overall story that we see time and time again.
Though I am confused how it took Chappell Roan's PR people this long to, like, clarify that, because wouldn't they have known immediately, like, "Yeah, we had no fucking clue who this guy was," because like, wasn't Chappell Roan
She
right
already
there
did
when it
release a
happened?
video that said, like, "I like kids. Of course, I wouldn't mind this particular situation. Like, I
Oh.
ate breakfast without even noticing anything." And then people said that she lied. So it was just a case
Uh-huh.
of, like, an even bigger celebrity than her stepdaughter. And the funniest thing I saw about the whole situation, and the only thing that I hope to take away from it, is that somebody said, "Imagine being Jude Law, and this is how you find out that you have an 11-year-old daughter." That's about all that we need to take away from that situation. Nobody did anything wrong in it.
People just love to hate on Chappell Roan, though, so I guess it's not surprising that people just didn't believe her, because I feel like because she's made, like, some kind of awkward comments about being like, "Oh, I don't like being a celebrity that much. I just wanna be somebody who makes music and gets paid to do that,"
The
which is like,
celebrity culture has gone totally crazy with parasocial relationships and all that. I don't know. Sometimes I do think that she comes off as maybe going too far or maybe being disrespectful to fans. But at the same time, it's like, I
Yeah.
don't know, it shouldn't be her being an amazing artist shouldn't come at the expense of flashes everywhere that she goes, needing nonstop security, all that. It's
I agree. I'm just like, maybe if that bothers you, just like go be friends, be fans of a celebrity who does just love having their face everywhere and being into everything, because there are plenty of them. And if it doesn't bother you and you're just listening to people's music because you like their music, and I literally don't think of Chappell Roan any more than that, then like
Pink
continue to
Pony
listen to
Club.
music. Yeah, just
Yes.
keep on dancing at the Pink Pony Club, good girls.
Ooh. Well, I hope everybody has